The volatile acidity was historically a characteristic of Poggio di Sotto wines. I'm sure that the clone selection is probably the first responsible of this. We have always used this same 182 biotype selection of Sangiovese that we found in our oldest vineyards, and our aromatic apport is very, very recognizable. And the volatile acidity is a principal component of this bouquet. For this reason, for me, the first point came from the vineyards biotype selection. The vinification technique, long open top pumping over, for example, with a very long time contact with the air, also responsible for the higher volatile acidity. The long aging in casks, it's another point. With the low sulfides, for example, because we are organic, it's important to improve the volatile acidity during the aging. Our Rosso has always a lower volatile acidity level because the aging in the cask are a little bit shorter.
Welcome to this special Clubhouse session of the Italian Wine Podcast. Listen in as members of the Italian wine community engage in fascinating conversations about contemporary wine topics. If you enjoyed the show, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. And remember to subscribe and rate the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your pods.
Hi everyone, this is Beatrice welcoming you to the Italian Wine Clubhouse Ambassadors Corner, one of the top-ranked shows on Italian Wine Podcast. Here, our ambassadors get the mic to interview their favorite producers with total freedom. And if you miss it live, no worries, it's all recorded and dropped later on the Italian Wine Podcast. Today's guest host is Alberto Rivera. Alberto embarked on his journey in the world of wine after concluding his service as a diplomat at the Mexican Embassy in Japan. In 2024, Alberto was admitted to the prestigious Vinitaly International Academy in Verona, where he successfully passed the rigorous examination to become an Italian wine ambassador. He also holds the title of Langhe Wine Ambassador. Today, he serves as a consultant for Italian specialized restaurants in Chihuahua and the northern region of Mexico, advising on wine selection and curating programs that highlight Italy's rich viticultural heritage. Today he's gonna interview Leonardo Berti of Poggio di Sotto. So Alberto, Leonardo, how you doing, guys?
Doing great, Beatrice.
Hi, Beatrice.
Hello. Alberto, are you ready for our 3 ritual questions?
Yes, more than ready.
Perfect. How did you discover the wines of Poggio di Sotto?
Well, I had to start by saying that Poggio di Sotto is truly a benchmark producer within Brunello di Montalcino. Once I began studying wine, seriously, special Italian wines, I became fascinated not only by how gracefully this wine reveals itself in the glass, but also by the philosophy of the state and the extraordinary effort devoted to preserving a natural archive of Sangiovese biotypes. From that point on, every time I have had the opportunity to taste Poggio di Sotto, I have paid close attention to the smallest detail that emerged in the glass. For me, it is a reference point for collectors, but more importantly, it carries a distinctive identity within Montalcino.
Wonderful. So tell us, why did you select Leonardo as your featured guest?
Well, I had the opportunity to meet Leonardo while I was in Montalcino during the Benvenuto Brunello 2024 at the walk-around tasting in the Chiostro. Even though we didn't go deeply into the technical aspects of the winemaking, he clearly explained how blessed Poggio di Sotto is to be located in one of the subzones, let's call it Castelnuovo dell'Abate. I will also add that Leonardo is one of the most knowledgeable and skilled winemakers in Tuscany. Bringing him into the Italian Wine Podcast feels like the perfect opportunity to dive deeply into one of the states that holds a botanical archive of so many biotypes of Sangiovese, which represent a world of possibilities in both the vineyard and the cellar. For me, this is what allows Poggio di Sotto to craft one of the most distinctive and unique interpretations of Brunello within the Montalcino appellation.
Lovely. What are the learning objectives that we should expect from this interview?
We will begin with an introduction to the person behind the wines of Poggio di Sotto, understanding Leonardo's role over the years as winemaking, and gaining his perspective on the state location within one of the most privileged areas for Sangiovese production in Italy. Secondly, we will explore the remarkable project of preserving the Sangiovese biotypes and examine how this natural genetic archive influenced the resulting wines. We will also geek out a bit on soil types, altitude, parcel differentiation, comparing upper and lower plots, while addressing a topic that should concern us all, which is climate change, and how Poggio di Sotto is preparing to navigate it in the future. Third, we will dive into the winemaking philosophy of the state, from its forward-thinking vision for Rosso di Montalcino to a discussion about volatile acidity and how, when carefully managed, it can enhance aromatic complexity. And lastly, if we have enough time, we will look towards the future, how Leonardo will present Poggio di Sotto to Gen Z drinkers and what advice he will offer to the next generation of winemakers.
That sounds like a really nice plan, so it's time for me to mute myself. Now I'm turning over the floor to you, Alberto. Have a nice interview, guys.
Thank you, Beatrice. And welcome, Leonardo, to the Italian Wine Podcast, and thank you for accepting the interview.
Thank you, Alberto. It's a pleasure.
I would like to start with a little bit of introduction by yourself. So could you share a bit about your personal journey and your role as winemaker at Poggio di Sotto?
Okay, thank you for the possibility to talk together about Poggio di Sotto, Alberto and Beatrice. My personal journey started in 2002, where I've started to study in Florence at the University of Florence. I have a degree in viticulture and winemaking. During the university and later, I've started my work in this fantastic world of wine in Antinori family, in the Tignanello winery. After that, I've worked for Tenuta San Giorgio. From 2009, I've moved to Montalcino in 2009. Tenuta San Giorgio is very close to Poggio di Sotto. It's our neighbors here. And so I already knew this area very well. I've started to understand the peculiarity of Castelnuovo dell'Abate area, the soil, the different altitude, what you want. When I arrived here, 2009, I felt immediately connected in this fantastic area. My role today is mainly to protect, to preserve the identity of Poggio di Sotto, and in my possibility to help the vineyards to express themselves.
Well, you have a long journey in the wine industry, in the vineyard, actually in the land, in the production of wine. So during your time at Tignanello and at the Università di Firenze, you were exposed to both practical and academic approaches to winemaking and to vineyard management. Which technical or conceptual elements from those experiences did you eventually integrate into Poggio di Sotto, and how did you adapt them to respect the state philosophy and identity?
Well, every winery in general have a different approach or have a different point of view of the winemaking or the grape production in general. Definitely the university give me the scientific approach. It's fundamental. And how to observe and understand what happens in the vineyards and in the cellar. At Tignanello, I learned the organization, the attention to detail. They introduced me in the real world of the winemaking. And now at Poggio di Sotto, I use this knowledge, but always with respect for the tradition of the winery, the natural balance, and this is the most important point of view for me. In every winery, it's important to have the right approach.
Thank you for that, Leonardo. So, Poggio di Sotto is often described as elegant, timeless, and even considered a cult classic wine. From your perspective as its winemaker, how would you define the soul of the state, and what are the elements that make it unmistakable Poggio di Sotto?
The soul of the Poggio di Sotto, or the winery in general, for me is the most important point. It's our focus. For me, the soul of Poggio is the respect for the vineyards, principally, and continuity over time. The estate has never followed the winemaking trends. We don't change style depending on the market or from the vintage fashion. We always maintain our focus for the traditional winemaking. My work, the work of my team, is mainly do this in vineyards, try to bring the healthy and balanced grapes and arrive in the perfect condition to the cellar to start the process. I always say that my works every day is 90% in the vineyards and 10% in the cellar, because the wine born in the vineyards and everything born in the vineyards. In winemaking, we intervene as little as possible, avoiding an excessive extraction, for example. And our idea is not to build the wine. It's not to make the wine. I prefer to be an assistant of wine, but I want to allow to Sangiovese and the place to be, the micro terroir of Castelnuovo, express themselves naturally. This is my point of view, my mission. This is why the wines remain always elegant and recognizable over the years.
Yeah, of course. And your thinking, it's so beautiful because actually wines, they are born from the vineyards, from the grapes that are picked. If they are healthy, they were eventually became one of the most beautiful wines at the end of the process of the winemaking. And I will follow this conversation with the next question, which is: the state is located in one of the most fascinating areas within the appellation, almost a perfect illustration of what we define as terroir. Could you elaborate on what it means in practical terms to work with 182 Sangiovese biotypes, and how this genetic diversity contributes to crafting one of the most elegant expressions of Brunello di Montalcino?
Working with these 182 biotypes, it's very special, and I'm so jealous of our collection. The richness of our wines, of Poggio in general, I'm sure that came from this orchestra of different genetic materials. And each biotype plays an active role into making aromatic and structural diversity. Together, not only one, together they create a complexity in a very natural way. None of these alone will be able to make an outstanding wine. Together, they do. This is an ambitious project involving muscle selection starting in 2011, this study with the University of Florence. And it will be possible with the partnership of Professor Bandinelli and Bertacchini from the University of Florence. And we have started 2011, and now we have more than 8 hectares with this approach of different biotype.
And in the vineyard, there is, for example, some difference to manage them, for example, one to another, or do you treat them all equally?
No, the manage is it's the same.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you. And then, as wine educator, I often explain that one of the most emblematic soil of Brunello di Montalcino is Galestro. However, within the 20 hectares of vineyards at Poggio di Sotto, there are multiple plots at different elevations, all vinified separately. Could you elaborate on how these different soils and perhaps altitudes and exposures as well influence the characters of the wines? What does each soil types contribute in terms of structure, tannin profile, aromatic expression, or longevity?
Well, the soil and the altitude difference is another peculiarity of Poggio di Sotto. This allows us to have many different aromatic nuances, for example, different concentration and varied tannins profiles, and the last but not the least, the different timing of harvest. Consider that we need more than 30 days from the first vineyard to picking to the last. And we have only one variety, Sangiovese. It's a very, very long time. And the difference of the soil, and especially the difference of altitude. For example, the lowest plots have a higher concentration of clay and galestro. It's very strong soil, very difficult to manage, but giving to the wines extreme elegance and finesse. Very, very small quantity, but really incredible quality. From 300 meters to 400 meters of altitude, there's more rich soil, rich in organic compound, rocks, and microelements, and give to the wine more structure, depth, and body in general. The wine are bigger, powerful in general. In the higher level, 450, 500 meters of altitude, the soil are more balanced, are more varied. There's a combination of clay, a little bit silt, and rocks. Every different plots, we always vinify separately to understand each vineyards. And later we blend to find the harmony. But every vinification, every aging, we maintain separately every different plots.
Yes, that's one of the philosophy that I love the most of Poggio di Sotto, how you vinifying the wines of Poggio di Sotto. So how the end of the process you then blend and create one of the most beautiful expressions of Brunello di Montalcino. And then I will add, this is a long question. So I recently watched a short video from the Brunello di Montalcino seminar at the Venus event in New York, where you mentioned that during that, I don't remember if it was 2019 or the 2016 vintage. You can correct me on that. There were 2 harvests done. So first, I would like to ask you, is harvesting in multiple phases becoming a common practice in Montalcino possible as an adaptation to climate change, or was this primarily a stylistic or strategic decision specific to that vintage? And secondly, when you decide to harvest in different moments, what guides that choice? Is related to specific parcels or even to particular Sangiovese biotypes that reach phenolic maturity at different times?
What guides us in the harvesting over multiple time is picking each part of vineyard or subplots, what you call it, at the right moment to avoid the surmaturation or green harvest. Green harvest in the terms of green tannins. We always want to find the right moment in each parcel. The harvest in different time was not tied to climate changing for me, but to the fact of the most of our vineyards have a very, very important steep slope. And we adopt this strategy every year, not some year. And the characteristics of what we harvest yearly, for example, are the great flavor, the great bouquet, high acidity, and usually are more immediate drinkability. In the second picket, usually is characterized by more body, more powerful, more structure. The tannins are more intense and more depth. And this is important to have the right balance and harmonic wine. For me, the most important difference for the climate change is the time of harvest, not in the terms of tannins or other, but in the day when we start. Respect to the 1980s, for example, we start 2 weeks and a half before than the average. We usually start in the last week of August in the last 10 years.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that Poggio di Sotto has been always done to harvest. So that's an interesting fact.
Yeah, it's our agronomic approach because we always want to picking very early to preserve the freshness and drinkability every year, every plots. And I always say I prefer to make an error 2 days before than not 2 days later. Because when you harvest 2 days before, you have a fantastic flavor, you have a little bit less body, but it's not a problem. The grapes with more body arrive later. But if you make an error 2 days later, you have the surmature notes, your wine are more tired, and it's difficult. It's more difficult to arrive at a very, very great wines.
Yes, of course. And I want to follow the conversation with a topic that is climate change. And we have seen an increasing of this topic year after year. How do you see Poggio di Sotto preparing for the future? Given the state's historical botanic archive of the almost 200 Sangiovese biotypes, do you see this genetic diversity as a form of resilience, or could be also represent a vulnerability, particularly in the face of increasing droughts and hydric stress? How are you approaching vineyards management today to preserve both the identity and the long-term sustainability of this patrimony?
The climate change, it's an evidence for us. And Our two main aspects that we consider are the preservation of soil hydric reserve. For example, for the rainy during the autumn and the winter, we try to preserve and maintain until June, July, and August. And the second point is maintain and preserve the canopy to shade the grapes, because the problem is not only the high temperature, but the problem is the sun radiation on the berry, on the grapes. And our agronomic approach main focus is conveyed into these different two aspects. The diversity of our vineyards in the terms of different biotypes help us, because some plants seem to adapt more easily to change. I don't know which is the reason, because there's not a study, but it's a sensation, it's a real. And there's not a scientific evidence for this. It's simply our feeling, but it's confirmed by the resilience of the grapes in a difficult years from this incredible genetic archive.
Oh, wow. It's so interesting to hear that some biotypes have adapted to difficult years. I wouldn't expect that, since I am not a vineyard expert or grape expert, but I have read that Sangiovese don't accept some droughts. But just what you said is so beautiful and interesting to hear. And then we are going now to change the conversation to a new topic, and it's about Rosso di Montalcino. So Poggio di Sotto was among the first states to envision Rosso di Montalcino not as a declassified wine, but as a true first wine with its own identity and dignity. That vision clearly distinguished the state from many producers for several years. Today, however, many states share this philosophy and are elevating the qualitative standards of Rosso di Montalcino, offering wine drinkers a more refined and intellectually engaging interpretation of this appellation. Could you share more about the winemaking process behind your Rosso di Montalcino? How is it conceived differently from Brunello di Montalcino, not only in terms of aging regulation, but in the vineyard selection, extraction, and overall stylistic intention?
Okay, all our 20 hectares are registered as Brunello for the consortium, and this giving to us the possibility to treat all the vineyards in the same way. We always start to produce Brunello every year, every season. We're not having to choose the Rosso and the Brunello grapes in the early stage, in the harvest time, in the first year, not in this moment. All the wine share the same vinification process with the really frequent pumping over. It's our trademark, and the long macerations. During the aging period, at least 1 year and a half, 2 years, we select and we requalify the barrel destined to be our Rosso. For this reason, the Rosso born after 2 years of aging. And it has the own possibility and personality. In the barrels, we look for freshness to produce the Rosso, drinkability, energy in the terms of vitality, and something more immediately ready to be enjoyed. Because the Rosso, consider that when we bottling, the Rosso we release after 4, 5, 6 months after the bottling time. It's important to be more ready to drink. Brunello instead is a wine for long aging and remaining in the cask. This is the moment when for us born the Rosso, not in vineyards, not in the harvest time, not in the vinification time, but only after 2 years of aging.
By any chance, do you have the number of bottles you produce of Rosso di Montalcino and then Brunello and Riserva to share?
Usually the Riserva, we produce only one cask when we produce, because we don't produce a Riserva every year. We produce a Riserva only when we are sure to be able to produce a very, very high standard level of Sangiovese. In this term, we produce a Riserva. Otherwise, we prefer to don't produce it. The remaining part, Brunello and Rosso, consider that we produce 30,000 bottles of Rosso. It's our average, and 40,000 bottles of Brunello.
Okay, great. Fantastic. So since we are already speaking with the winemaker behind what are considered one of the Italy's cold wines, and certainly one of the most elegant expression of Brunello. I would like to ask you, Leonardo, about something that has intrigued me for quite some time. During the Italian Wine Ambassador Program, we had the opportunity to taste your wines alongside representatives of the consortio, and there was a brief discussion about the role of volatile acidity in shaping the aromatic profiles of the wines at Poggio di Sotto. It was mentioned that a low level of volatile acidity can contribute to an aromatic lift and complexity of the wines. Could you expand on how you approach this element in your winemaking philosophy? At what point does volatile cross the line from providing complexity to becoming a fault? And how do you manage that delicate balance in the cellar?
Very good question and very technical question. The volatile acidity was historically a characteristic of Poggio di Sotto wines. I'm not sure where it came from, but I'm sure that the clone selection is probably the first responsible of this. We have always used this same 182 biotype selection of Sangiovese, and that we found in our oldest vineyards, and our aromatic apport is very, very recognizable. And the volatile acidity is a principal component of this bouquet. For this reason, for me, the first point came from the vineyards, came from the biotype selection. The vinification technique, long open top pumping over, for example, with a very long time contact with the air, also responsible for the higher volatile acidity. The long aging in casks, it's another point. With the low sulfides, for example, because we are organic from the foundation, and for my approach, for my winemaking approach, I prefer to have a low sulfides level. And it's important to improve the acidity, the volatile acidity during the aging. For example, our Rosso has always the lower volatile acidity level that not the Brunello, because the aging in the cask are a little bit shorter.
Yeah, this question is actually very technical and difficult. I even had to study a little bit to write it, but you explained totally fine. Thank you so much. And then, can you elaborate and explain how the next vintage to be released in the market could be, or how do you perceive the last vintage, the 2025, how was in the vineyard, maybe?
The vintage 25 are very, very interesting. We exit from 2022, 23, and 24, 3 vintages very difficult for different aspects. But the 25 are more similar to the 19, probably, the 21. Very great vintage. And it's a really pleasure to work with the grapes during the season, and now with the wine. We have started some weeks ago the aging in the cask with the 25, but there's all the potential to produce a very, very good vintage for Rosso, for Brunello, and I'm sure to produce Riserva.
Well, I looked forward to see a 2025 vintage of Poggio di Sotto. So I will ask a next question. That is, as a Gen Z man who drinks wine, I have encountered many comments suggesting that my generation is disengaged from wine culture. I don't fully agree with that. I believe that we are perhaps drinking less quantity of wine, but we are far more attentive to quality, authenticity, and the history behind the bottle. So I would like to ask you, how would you communicate the philosophy of Poggio di Sotto to this new generation of wine drinkers? How do you translate heritage, terroir, long aging into a language that resonates with people who value transparency, identity, and purpose?
It's a big challenge for the market, I know. But I think the young people are still interested in the wine, but they want authenticity, because the new generation have more possibility to understand, to discover the story under the winery. They want to understand the story in general, but the place and the people that stay behind the bottle. So the communication must be honest and simply. For me, this is the keys. And for a winery, it's important to have an authentic story to tell, and that the wines produced reflect fully the estate philosophy. This is the most important point for me. It's maintain the identity. If you have a very good and very interesting story to tell, it's important to explain and reflect in your glass. It's important that in your glass talk your wine. You can talk, you can do the storyteller, but it's important that in your glass talk your wine.
Yes, of course, it needs to be a reflection of what you share in the glass, in the winery, in the vineyards. Looking towards the future, what advice would you give to the next generation of winemakers who will eventually guide Poggio di Sotto or any winery in Tuscany? What mindset, values, or technical discipline must be preserved, and where do you believe innovation is still possible?
First of all, it's a fantastic work, but it's strong because the agriculture, the nature in general, it's a strong. But if you have passion, there's not problem, because with the passion and humility, especially, there's not a problem to produce a very good grapes, a very good wine. Patience is always very important to obtain the right time for everything, to plant a new vineyards, to picking, to do the blend after the aging. Patience is always very important. And the wine teaches humility for me, for everyone, every year. Every year is different. Every season that start, we restart our approach to the vineyards because every season is different. And in every March, April, when the season starts, we need to reset our brain. And it's important to start from the zero. We have the experience, but every season it's different. The sensitivity, it's another point. It's important to respect the nature and must always stay at the center, the respect for the nature. And for me, with these skills, it's easy to produce a very good wine because when you have the passion, patience, and respect for the nature, that's all.
Yeah, things I admire the most of Montalcino when I went in 2024. The Brunello di Montalcino area of production, it's so well preserved in terms of culture and nature that you see vineyards next to a small plot or area of forest, and it's so beautiful to see that Montalcino, the mindset is tradition and always respect to nature. We are almost approaching the end of our conversation. I'd like to ask you, you are both a traveling winemaker and a Tuscan native. How would you pair your wines with traditional Tuscan cuisine? And then expanding beyond the region, which international dishes do you feel the best highlight the elegance and structure of your wines?
I'm a true foodie like you, but I'm a very bad chef. I know, of course, the typical pairing with the Brunello is the Tuscan food, everybody know. And the Brunello works naturally, such as with roasted meat, game, aged cheese, everything. It's normal. Pasta, it's really normal. However, I think that our wines are so elegant that can be perfectly paired with the seafood, especially the Asian cuisine in general. I've done a lot of trips for works in the last years, and pairing with the Asian cuisine works very well, very, very well. And probably the secret of the pairing is remaining in the elegance and in the finesse of the wine that you can pairing with what you want.
Yeah, of course. I'm not surprised that Poggio di Sotto wines can be paired with so many dishes. And I'm Mexican. I live up in the north where the meat is very typical. And I almost always pair Brunello di Montalcino with meat, like a bistecca. So nice. We have finished the conversation. Such a nice interview.
Perfect. So, to wrap things up, For those who are interested to participate, just send us a DM through our Instagram or mail our Italian Wine Podcast producer at info@italianwinepodcast.com. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in. And thank you again, Alberto and Leonardo. That was such a wonderful interview. So thank you so much. And this is our goodbyes. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you, Bea. Thank you, Leonardo.
Thank you, Alberto. Thank you, Bea. Ciao, ciao.
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through italianwinepodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, cin cin.